Now we have with us Professor Rajesh Khanna, President NIIT University, talking on education policy in the new normal. He obtained his BTech, MTech, and PhD in chemical engineering from IIT Kanpur, an institution which has been acknowledged as the nursery for nurturing students, shaping faculty into knowledge providers of repute, and a mother institution for shepherding later institutions. He did his postdoctoral research at CNRS Mulhouse, France, and was an honorary visiting research fellow at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. In a career spanning 23 years, Professor Khanna has held various faculty and administrative positions at IIT Delhi, chief amongst them being head of Department of Chemical Engineering, dean of students, faculty in charge for sports, faculty advisor for student society, and mentor to countless number of students. He also served as the vice chairman of joint entrance examination and has contributed in devising chemical engineering curriculum for many institutes. Over to you, Professor Khanna.
Good morning, everyone. We have gathered here to take part in Higher Education Conference and Awards, a full-day conference on November 26, 2021. It's organized by DataQuest. The theme of the conference is Empowering the Next Gen. I'm here to present my views on the theme and deliver the keynote address. Physical nature of life demands that young be nurtured and empowered. For progress of our civilization and for even its sustenance, it is imperative that the new set of doers and thinkers be wiser than the earlier set. Education is the chosen method to achieve this. Education happens everywhere and all the time. It happens formally and in time-bound, discrete steps through the educational system, and informally in a lifelong, continuous manner through the societal and personal experiences that one go through as one lives one's life. We are here to talk about the formal education system. However, there is a strong interdependence on the formal and informal systems, that is the school and college and universities and society on the other hand, with society shaping the formal education and vice versa. The biggest challenge of education is that we need to realize this challenge. I'll repeat once again, this is the biggest challenge, that one method of education, that's the informal education, and the formal education, that's the other method. They both provide enough resistance to prevent this relation or the interdependence between the two turning into a vicious cycle from a benevolent one. If somehow, if the society takes the wrong path or the formal education takes the wrong path. So the course correction lies within these two modes. The society can correct if there is something wrong with the education system. The education system can correct if something is wrong with the society. Of course, for a very happy situation, it should be a benevolent relationship, a cycle, a benevolent cycle where each is helping the other. And that is the best situation one has to be. So the formal system of education and the informal system of education, both helping each other rather than, at loggerheads. Higher education, especially the technical education, it is primarily affected by the economy. That's a rather limited part of the society, but very important. And it provides the tools for sustenance and growth of the civilization. And how does it do it? It does through one or both approaches. That is, it either takes a practice-based approach where we understand the tools, or a research-based approach, or both. So most of the higher education would either be a practice-based higher education or a research-based higher education, or a combination. In most of the education is actually a combination. A system based on in-person interaction between the next gen and the current experts it has been found to be the best way to achieve this. So you have this old Gurukul kind of system or modern scholarly approach where a supervisor sits with a student, or there are classrooms where students are gathered and the expert goes there and interacts with them. So this system, over the ages, we have seen to be the best one. So that is an in-person formal interaction between the next gen, that's new students, and the current experts, mostly the teachers. And then it has worked well. And technological developments, as they have been, benefiting other aspects of our civilization, they were gradually being integrated, and they were being integrated for several reasons. I mean, and one of the end objectives, they were there to increase the dimensions of interactions. So you are not only interacting with, just a lecture, but a multimedia interaction is there. Slides are there, presentations are there, lecturing is there, so the voice is there, the movies are there. So it increases the dimensions of interaction. So more and more interaction is possible. A richer interaction is possible. It enhances the senses. So you can magnify things, you can record things, you can increase the volume. So all that, technological development and assistive technologies. So people who needed some help, that was provided. Most importantly, it removed the spatio-temporal constraints of participants, which is the teacher and the students, and facilitate the availability of content. So the major technological developments were focused on increasing the dimensions, enhancing the senses, removing the barriers and constraints, and also allowing the easy facility of content that was to be discussed. So there was a steady and comfortable pace at which this technology integration was taking place. And parallelly, some other research was going on that was on cognition and how mind functions and how one learns, and teaching technologies were there. So a better understanding of this cognition and how one learns, it also kind of aided this change and technology integration. So it was all a happy place. Things were happening slowly at a comfortable pace. But 2 years ago, the pandemic struck and it disrupted everything. And among it, it forced a furious pace of change on all of us. So something that was a steady and comfortably, moving around, technology getting integrated, more and more wisdom coming into teaching and learning and education. The formal system was improving and evolving. But this pandemic, it forced a pace of change that was furious. The world reacted swiftly and effectively. And that, years from now, it would be a testimony to the human spirit and our ability to accept and react to change. So the world reacted swiftly, and almost all formal education was converted to an online mode. So that happened. That happened in schools, that happened in big universities, that happened in private places, that happened everywhere. Even via education, everything, was converted to online mode as far as possible. An ecosystem to facilitate it quickly developed. And both the government and the market and the private players, they all contributed to it. Everyone contributed to it. The people contributed to it by adopting to that change and to that ecosystem. The key ingredients that were of data, device, software, content, and even policy were put in place. And the education system somehow managed to function. Policies were quickly changed in educational institutes to allow for students to graduate in time, to carry on with their learning. So this integration of technology in the educational system, that happened at a furious pace, and suddenly, everything changed. The current experts suddenly realized that they need to understand what digital world is before they can be, even effective or even sustain. So a lot of changes happened, and the world, fortunately reacted in a way so that we could, just somehow survive. And that's what my personal assessment is, that we could somehow manage to function. I mean, nothing great, but we are alive to live another day and improve. And somehow, we had a lot of learning also. Uh, the major fallout of this was, of course, the technology got integrated. So that technology is in place now. So that is the good thing that has happened. I mean, as it happened with all bad things that happen. Some good things also come out of them. The challenging thing is that remains at this level of integration of technology, and that's huge, unprecedented integration of technology in educational system. It has happened mostly along the width, and it has still not gone to the depth that is required for a good educational system or a functioning educational system, or for an effective educational system, so as to say. So while everybody could be inclusive, so it was very inclusive, everything could be taught, every domain, every skill could be taught to some level, so in that sense the width was covered beautifully and effectively. The depth, there's a lot of challenges that are still there. And another key finding that is emerging out of this forced experiment is that online education alone is not enough to empower. And that is the sub-theme of the conference. That I mean, we all agree, almost everyone in this world now agrees, that online education alone is not enough to empower the next generation. Why? Firstly, the vital component of societal and personal experience, that one goes through an in-person system, that is missing. That component is missing completely. So there's no personal experience, there's no societal experience. Even in universities, you go, there are big world, you go and meet so many people, and then you have a small society, a part of the society in universities. So that is completely missing. Secondly, there is only so much that can be experienced online, even in different domains of knowledge. So the domain of knowledge dictates how much can be understood or experienced or taught online. In some disciplines, as we will discuss, it's not even possible to have things online. I mean, they have to be done in person. So that whole methodology, the whole concept of that domain has to change. I mean, we need to question, how to go about it if we want to have a completely online learning in that domain. I mean, something like these physical engineering, and we'll discuss them later when we talk about the methods. Most importantly, and that has, is even more serious, and probably there's no substitute to it, that the teaching learning process itself is not complete in an online mode. That is the biggest issue, and something that will, there's no solution to it. We need to have in-person interaction. So we agree that we need a hybrid, a blend of both online as well as in person. So I don't use the word offline because it kind of confuses. Typically, when I was growing up, offline would mean absent. But now offline is actually means present. So we'll not use the offline term, we'll use in person. So the current challenge is how to benefit from both. The technology integration brought about by the online education and in-person interactions that embrace a hybrid mode of education. And the key issue is, where does the balance lie? How much of what and in an educational system. So, and this balance will be solved at many different levels, and depends on many different issues. there's no one answer and no one right answer to where this balance would be in a given situation. Uh, First of all, if we talk about domains, now you think about these physical engineering subjects, something as, let's say, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, chemical engineering, they would necessarily have, strong in-person component, because you need to deal with matter and you need to materials and physical things, and you need to see how they behave, and you look at all those properties and how to manipulate this material. And that's what these physical engineering subjects are. So to imagine that they could be shown and that learning can happen through videos, through simulations, that process doesn't work. You see, you actually need to see in person and experience that. So most of the physical engineering subjects, along with their associated laboratory experiments, more so, they would need a strong in-person component. And that is happening. That we are seeing that, in the beginning, when institutes are getting back to the hybrid mode or to in-person mode, the labs are the most important ones and are considered first. So laboratory of physical engineering subjects, for example, would have a strong in-person component. Something as computer science and engineering and all, in the family of computer science and engineering, I would include information technology, I would include machine learning, artificial intelligence, cyber security, sensors, IIoT, all these, computer science family of domains, they can be taught with a higher percentage of online mode. So there the technology can be very, very, useful, and a higher percentage of online component would be there. Then we look at the situation on the ground or the resources and the availability of data, device, content, and we talked about this spatio-temporal constraints of teachers, participants at the same place, being at the same place at the same time. So all those constraints or issues would also decide, what would work in what situation. So at some places, if we do not have a current expert there physically, then obviously, we'll have to have a greater tilt towards the online education. So this balance between online and offline would even percolate down to individual lectures level. And that's the most interesting aspect. So we now hear terms like flipped lectures. And to my mind, that is where the typical hybrid nature of education would come into play and would be illustrated. So in a flipped mode lectures where you already, go through the video or the online component, and then there is an in-person interaction, and sometimes that in-person is also, a hybrid mode. That would be the way to go for most of the teaching learning process. And even in completely digital domains, because while the domain itself, and I would stress on this, while the domain itself can be taught in an online mode, the teaching learning process itself, and I'll repeat, that is the major issue to be solved. And I don't think that can be solved so easily or can even be solved. And that would necessitate an in-person interaction. So while the domain and the availability of resources and everything else can be resolved with some way or the other, it can be resolved. But the teaching learning process, that, how the brain functions, how the brain responds to different cues, how, people learn and are open to interaction when they are face to face in person, and the senses that get activated, and the capacity to assimilate and to accept the knowledge which go into the teaching learning process, that would necessitate the in-person component. So while we'll have a lot of content that would come through in a multimedia mode. We'll have lot of lectures in an online mode, but to complete that, we would necessarily require an inline or uh, in-person interaction. And flipped lectures, I think, is the way to go, where each individual learning session is hybrid in nature. So to conclude, I would say a flipped lecture mode where every learning session is a hybrid session is the way to go, because it is due to the learning and teaching process itself, the mechanics of it, how a human being responds to an in-person interaction as opposed to an online interaction. So the senses that got activated, the propensity to accept new knowledge, the interactions, that multi-sense interaction that happens in person is something that can never be, or at least not with the present state of technology and acceptance of it, will never be achieved in an online mode. Whereas the content, the spatio-temporal constraints, the multimodal delivery of content, all that can happen best through an online mode. So a flipped lecture mode, that is something in my view is the way to go once again. So every lecture would be done in an hybrid mode. There will be an online mode where the students and the participants, they have access to an online recorded things, and then follow it up by a series of in-person and hybrid interactions where there's some background already of the lesson and the session, and then the circle gets complete of learning. So in my view, the mechanics of learning is the major driving force towards a hybrid mode rather than the domain itself or the availability of resources themselves. So that's all at this point of time from me. With the furious pace of change that has happened, and we have got a taste of it, we also know what we are capable of. So I'll not be surprised if, within a year's time in the next edition of a similar workshop, we'll have a completely different viewpoint. I'm open to that. I've learned this. That has been my learning, that we can change very fast. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Khanna, for such insightful thoughts.